The case of Katherine Knight, the woman who skinned her partner the murder of John Price in 2000, is one of Australia's most horrific and grotesque crimes, committed by his partner, Katherine Knight. Known for her violent tendencies and troubled past, Katherine Knight's final act of brutality shocked even the most experienced law enforcement officers. Her crime was so disturbing that she became the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Katherine Knight, a history of violence. Born in 1955, Katherine Knight grew up in a violent and abusive household. Her father was an alcoholic who physically assaulted her mother, and her upbringing was marked by chaos and instability. Despite this, Katherine developed a reputation for being hardworking and reliable in her career as a slaughterhouse worker, a job that, ominously, would play a role in her later crime. Knight's relationships were always volatile and abusive. She had a history of assaulting her partners, often leaving them in fear of her violent outbursts. In one instance, she attempted to strangle one of her ex-husbands on their wedding night. Another partner woke up one night to find her standing over him with a knife. Despite these incidents, her partners would stay with her for varying lengths of time before ultimately fleeing the relationship due to her violent tendencies. By 1995, Knight had met John Price, a well-liked man who had previously been in a long-term marriage. The relationship between Knight and Price was tumultuous from the start, with frequent fights and periods of reconciliation. Despite knowing about Knight's violent past, Price continued the relationship, even after their frequent arguments turned physically abusive. The build-up to murder. As their relationship deteriorated, John Price became increasingly afraid of Katherine Knight. He confided in friends and co-workers that she had become uncontrollable and violent, and he feared for his life. Price eventually decided to end the relationship, throwing Knight out of his house. He also sought a restraining order against her. Despite these steps, Knight continued to pursue him, and in a moment of weakness, Price allowed her back into his home one final time. This decision would prove fatal. The murder. On the night of February 29, 2000, Katherine Knight made her final, gruesome move. After cooking dinner for Price and watching television with him, she seduced him into bed. Once Price was asleep, Knight retrieved a large butcher knife that she had kept from her time working in a slaughterhouse. Around 2 a.m., she began her brutal attack. Knight stabbed Price 37 times while he lay defenseless in bed. Price woke up during the attack and attempted to flee, but Knight chased him through the house, continuing her vicious assault. He managed to make it to the front door, leaving a trail of blood throughout the house, but collapsed before he could escape. Price died from his injuries, but the horror didn't end there. The gruesome aftermath. After murdering John Price, Katherine Knight proceeded to commit one of the most disturbing acts of mutilation ever documented in modern crime. Using her butchering skills from the slaughterhouse, Knight skinned Price's body with surgical precision, removing the entire skin, including his face, in one piece. She then hung the skin from a meat hook in the doorway of the living room. As if this wasn't horrific enough, Knight then decapitated Price and placed his head in a pot on the stove, where she began cooking parts of his flesh. She prepared a meal using Price's body, intending to serve it to his children, who were due to visit the house the next day. Plates of food, complete with vegetables and meat, were laid out on the table with placards bearing the children's names. The discovery. The next morning, a neighbor became concerned when Price didn't show up for work. His employer also alerted the police, given Price's repeated warnings about Knight's violent tendencies. When officers arrived at the scene, they were greeted by one of the most gruesome crime scenes in Australian history. Inside, they found Price's skinned and mutilated body, as well as the disturbing meal Knight had prepared. Knight herself was found in a coma, having taken a large amount of pills in a failed suicide attempt. The trial and sentencing. Katherine Knight was charged with murder and pleaded guilty in court. Her defense team attempted to argue that she was insane, but the court dismissed this claim, finding her fully aware of her actions. The sheer brutality of her crime was so shocking that Knight became the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. To this day, Knight remains in prison, where she is known to be one of the most feared inmates. Her crime continues to haunt those involved, particularly the police officers and paramedics who first arrived at the scene. A legacy of horror. The murder of John Price and the actions of Katherine Knight are among the most disturbing in criminal history. The calculated brutality, the mutilation, and the grotesque aftermath left a permanent scar on those who knew Price and on the public at large. It serves as a chilling reminder of how deep the potential for violence can run beneath the surface, and how even those closest to us can become the perpetrators of unimaginable horror.